What makes good copy? What does good copy look like? Or rather, what does it read like? To some extent, the fine detail of this depends on context. That is, when and where you expect your copy is going to be read. But before we look at any of that, there is one really fundamental question you need to answer first. Have you got an adequate brief? With experience, you will just know. You'll just know if you know enough about what you're supposed to be writing about to actually write it. Don't assume just because your client or line manager has given you a brief and told you to get on with it. Don't assume that you now have got all the information you need in order to start writing. It might well be that the person who's briefed you has a detailed knowledge of the subject that you've been briefed about, and you haven't. And just because somebody thinks they've given you a clear brief doesn't necessarily mean that they have. If the brief doesn't give you a really clear understanding of all aspects of the product or service or idea that you're going to write about, then the chances are that you're not adequately prepared to start writing. Now, it is quite possible that you might not grasp every detail in the first draft. And it is quite acceptable in some circumstances to leave blanks for a client or subject expert to add in the detail. But you need to understand the topic to at least the point where you know the things that you don't know. And by that, I mean that your written content should not be a series of key points that you've been able to understand, then punctuated with gaping holes where you just can't figure out what you need to say or even why you should be saying it. When I say that you need to know what you don't know, I mean that your overall understanding should be good enough to allow you to ask the right questions in order to fill in the gaps in your understanding and, therefore, the gaps in your copy. Before you start writing, you need to have figured out what the overall structure is going to be, what your USP is, if you've got one. How are you going to break down what might be an extensive narrative into easily understandable sections? And what objections you might need to try and overcome in your copy, and so on. Think here about what good copy really needs to do. You need to translate your company's or client's product or service, however complicated that might be, into something that a non-expert, i.e. your audience, can grasp and understand very quickly, at least to the point where they've understood enough to decide they want to invest their time to carry on reading or to respond to your call to action. And this all needs a degree of understanding of the subject that is often not appreciated by those who are not familiar with writing copy. Remember as well that just giving your audience an understanding is not enough. They have to feel the desire and usually be prompted into some action. So, in conclusion, if you just don't get it, if you don't fully understand the substantial part of what you're intending to write about, then the chances are that you're not going to be able to write about it in a convincing way. If the brief that you've been given doesn't enable you to get this understanding, then that's not your fault. You just haven't been adequately briefed. You need to make this clear. You need to be given or to acquire yourself more information in order to get this understanding before you start writing.